Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this latest debate in the series organised by Ireland's Future. You're very, very welcome here to Derry St Colum's Halls, where we are today. And I'm very sorry for the fact that we're starting a bit late. As you know, Derry is in a different time zone. Well, actually, no, we did have some technical difficulties, so our apologies. Those of you who believe in Irish reunification have, of course, been waiting 100 years already, but we're sorry to have added to that time. We've got a fabulous panel here today, but first of all, I'm just going to tell you a bit about the organisation Ireland's Future. It was set up in 2019 as a forum for debate and discussion about preparing for constitutional change and reunification in Ireland. It's guided by the values of the Good Friday Agreement and dedicated to the promotion and protection of human rights, equality and the fostering of mutual respect between all views and traditions that share this island. And it says that constitutional change must be on the basis of the consent of citizens of the island of Ireland. And if you want to read any of its documents, you'll find them on irelandsfuture.com. And just before we start the debate, I'd like to thank Garvan O'Doherty for his support for this event and indeed for providing us with this splendid hall, St Colum's Hall. Though I have to say, without an audience in here, it is a bit of a cold house for all of us. But it's too bad that we haven't got a crowd here today, because I think a lot of Derry and Londonderry people would have come out to hear this debate. But I hope that many people are sharing in from home. So I'll just introduce our speakers in the order in which they will be speaking. First of all, we have Patricia Mcbride, and Patricia is one of the founding board members of Ireland's Future. She's from South Derry, and she's a lawyer specialising in asylum law. She's also a columnist with the Irish News and a frequent commentator on the media on Northern Ireland politics. She's a former Churchill Fellow. She's written about the history of memory in countries that are emerging from conflict, and she's also a former Victims Commissioner in Northern Ireland. And her memories of this hall include being here in 2002 for a Christy Moore concert, which was in commemoration of Bloody Sunday. Our second speaker then is Colin Harvey, and Colin is also a founding board member of Ireland's Future. He's Professor of Human Rights Law at Queen's University Belfast and a Fellow at the Senator George Mitchell Institute, and he formerly was head of Queen's University Law School, and he has also sat as a Commissioner on the Human Rights Commission, and he's from Derry, and he told me that he remembers mainly going to the cinema here, which is attached to St Colum's Hall. Our next speaker will be Colm Eastwood. Colm is the leader of the SDLP and the MP for Foyle. He was the youngest ever mayor at Derry City Council, and he was the MLA for Foyle for 8 years from 2011 to 2019. And he told me that he has plenty of St Colum's Hall's memories, but none that are shareable. So I didn't press him on that. Our next speaker will be Ifa Grace Moore. Ifa is a political correspondent for the Irish Examiner, and she was born and raised in the city of Derry here. She's most recently, she's already had many awards, but most recently she was named Irish Journalist of the Year 2021 for the work that she did with Paul Hosford in the Examiner, uncovering political scandals in the Republic. And Aoife is currently writing a book on the rise of modern Sinn Féin, which will be published next year by Penguin. And then finally, our last speaker will be Declan Kearney. We discussed this earlier and I've immediately given him the wrong pronunciation. Declan Kearney from Antrim. He's the national chairperson of Sinn Féin and has been since 2009. He was appointed as a junior minister in the Executive Office in 2020, and he's the MLA for South Antrim, and he sits on 2 Stormont committees, one on public accounts and one on justice. So we're going to start with Patricia, and I'm going to ask each of the speakers to just speak to us for about 3 to 5 minutes about their feeling and their views on reunification or constitutional change in Ireland. So Patricia.
Opportunity to reconsider the social contract and shape the country the way that we want, rather than the one that we've inherited through trials and tribulations of history. Part of that imagining of the new Ireland includes acknowledging and accepting different identities and acknowledging the fact that even having these different identities, we do have a commonality of citizenship. And the discussion around identity has for the most part focused on the binary two traditions narrative, but that's something that we really need to expand upon. If we truly want to integrate everyone who calls this island home into a new Ireland, then we need to expand the definition of Irishness. We need to ensure that it embraces the cultural and traditional expressions of everyone. No one should be forced to assimilate into a culture or a country that they don't feel part of. We know from the most recent census in the 26 counties that 1 in 6 people living in that part of Ireland were not born on the island of Ireland. And we also expect that a similar number will be revealed in the 2021 census in the north, which is due to be published soon. So we're looking into a situation where around 1 million people who live on this island were not born here but have chosen to call it home. And those individuals are going to have a significant impact on the outcome of any future border poll. But more importantly, in shaping the reality of what it means to be Irish. The culture, heritage and tradition that they will bring enriches us all. And the framework for constitutional change is set out in the Good Friday Agreement, which affirms not only that the principle of consent, but also that any future constitutional arrangements will ensure equality of civil, political, social, cultural rights and freedoms and parity of esteem, and just and equal treatment for the identity, ethos and aspirations of all communities. These are worthy words, but respect for every tradition means nothing without a robust framework of legal guarantees that protect identity and citizenship. A Bill of Rights needs to be central to the protections put in place in a new Ireland, because that's how you do parity of esteem. New voices in the debate will bring new ideas about how the future will look, and we can't shut down any new ideas as soon as they're mooted if we really do want a new society. All ideas and suggestions and the consequences and benefits that flow from them when it comes to building an Irish society need to be open for discussion. United Irelanders, as well as everyone else, have to be prepared to look at new approaches. We need to have an approach to dialogue which allows everyone's voice to be heard. Agreements to be banked and due consideration given to the important place that all minorities should have in a new society. And those who say that debate on the possible future reunification of Ireland is in itself divisive need to be gently reminded, but firmly reminded, that closing down this debate is an attempt to silence legitimate political aspirations. Talking has never hurt anybody. And I think social liberalism and political developments, not least the impact of Brexit, have reframed the debate on reunification completely. We understand the visceral importance of identity and heritage in people's lives in a way that we cannot now just lay aside. Big things like the Constitution, the structure of government and how elections are run are almost the easy part because there are models in existence that we must select from, but the hard work of negotiations is going to be on the small but vitally important things that are going to include flags, anthems, the importance of the contribution of all identities in a shared society. So let's look at the models and formulas of government and society that exist internationally that we can use as exemplars, and let us draw on the culture and heritage and tradition of everyone who calls this island home, to build an inclusive, respectful and rights-based future for the whole island of Ireland. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Patricia. Colin, would you like to take the podium?
Thank you very much, Susan, and thank you very much, Ireland's Future, for the invitation to be here today. I'm absolutely delighted to be back in Derry, and thank you all for engaging in this ongoing conversation. In my opening remarks, I just want to focus on the title for the talk today, which is Preparing for a New Ireland. First of all, New Ireland, and secondly, preparation. Let's be absolutely clear. Many people are engaging in this constitutional conversation because they take the term New Ireland very seriously indeed. In other words, they are engaging in this discussion because of its transformative potential in relation to equality, human rights, social justice, and climate justice. So I'd like to start by making one thing absolutely clear. If you're using the term New Ireland in the constitutional conversation on this island now, I make a plea to all of you and to everyone. You better mean it. Second, preparation. I am a runner. Many of you might have been doing park runs this morning. 10 years ago in 2012, if somebody had have told me I would have run every half marathon in Belfast, a few Derry half marathons, and actually the Belfast marathon twice, I would have thought they were delusional. They were imagining things. But in the 10 years since then, I've done those things. Don't say that to boast in any way. I say that to make a point about preparation, because all runners know that in order to finish a marathon, your 5K, 10K, or half marathon, you need to do the planning, you need to do the preparation. And if you do that planning and preparation, you'll get there, you'll get over the line. All runners also know that it hurts, it often hurts all the way through. But particularly if you're running a marathon, those last 5 or 6 miles can be very, very challenging indeed. My view, my personal view is, this island is on those last 5 or 6 miles of that journey. It is going to be turbulent. It may well be challenging and difficult. But by working together, by including everyone, we will get there. It's time to work on a manifesto for a new Ireland, to make those propositions, to put them on the table. And I make a call today to the Irish government. The Irish government cannot be a bystander in the conversation about constitutional change on this island. The Irish government cannot simply wait to see what London does. Everyone on this island needs leadership from Ireland. This discussion needs to be led from Ireland. The Irish government needs to show leadership. I call on the Irish government today to show leadership in leading the conversation about a new and united Ireland. And just to end my opening remarks, 3 years ago, we gathered together in the Waterfront Hall in Belfast. We're now, of course, here today, some of us, in the first city, Derry, to reiterate our call. Let me be absolutely clear to end. I made no apologies then, and I make no apologies today. None of us, none of you, need permission to do the work of preparing for a new Ireland. So I want to commend you all for the remarkable initiatives that are ongoing. And I'd like to end by saying, keep going. We will all get there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Colin. Colin.
Thank you, Susan, and thanks to Ireland's Future, particularly for being in Derry and for leading this debate over the past couple of years. This is a very historic building. It's seen many major historical events in Irish history. And this is a city that has been at the centre of all of the big change that we have seen across this island in the last 100 years. I am absolutely convinced that we will be at the centre of the coming change as well, because there's nobody and nowhere else on this island that has seen and been impacted by the effects of partition than Derry. We're at the wrong end of all the economic and health league tables. We've seen our young people, and we still see it today in their hundreds, leaving our shores and never coming back again. That's because, in my view, partition has failed. We haven't been able to provide the kind of future that our young people deserve. And when I say that for a reason, because my view is this conversation, this debate over the next number of years has to be about the future. Young people will decide what happens this island, and young people need to be given, as Colin says, a manifesto for change, a manifesto that will create a more prosperous, a more fair, a more liberal, more open society and economy, and a European future as well. I think if we can do that, we can change what this is about. This cannot be about addressing old wrongs or righting old wrongs or trying to settle some old scores. That will never work. We've been doing that for 100 years. The future is going to be based upon what we can offer people. My view is the kind of Ireland that I want to see is one where nobody has to leave our shores, where people can be lifted out of poverty and given every single chance that they deserve and that they should have. In places like Derry, we've been held back as a result of partition. But I also think we need to ensure that we, of course, embrace all of the different identities on this island. Britishness has to have a place, a very strong place in the future of this new Ireland. And New Ireland is an interesting term. It's one we have to think about every single day, because it can't be about the past, it has to be about the future, and that means embracing every tradition on this island. I want to say one thing about the current politics. The DUP seem determined to ensure that we don't have institutions of the Good Friday Agreement, and if there are any nationalists out there who have a sneaking regard for that, or think that there might be some comfort in the idea that if we don't have Stormont, we'll slip magically into a united Ireland, I think we have to guard against that kind of thinking, because our job is to, with the institutions of the Good Friday Agreement, is to prove that politics can work, that Irish people can make change through democratic processes on this island. The example from Scotland, I think, is one that we need to think about very clearly. I don't want to be in a situation where we hand more powers back to Boris Johnson and the British Tory party. So we need to embrace what we have. We need to use the institutions of the Good Friday Agreement better. We need to prove that we can run this place, and we need to offer a positive vision for the future that everybody can embrace. My view to end is the UK is coming to an end. I think that will happen, but it's how we get there, the process, the journey. That is the most important part of this. We can do this well. We've been given a huge opportunity in our generation, but it's a burden as well. We have to do it properly. We have to give the next generation an opportunity that we never had. We can do it well, or we can do it badly. I'd like to sit down with people from right across this island and prepare for the future so that we do it properly. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Colin. Declan, Aoife's next.
Hello, I'm Ifa Moore. I'm a journalist, currently working in Dublin, but I am probably the proudest Derry woman there is. I am Derry to my bones, and I think it's very fitting that we're in Derry this week. This week marks the 50th anniversary of Bloody Sunday, a day that I think is imprinted across Derry in every Derry person and further afield. I feel very much that I am, although I don't want to judge any people's age here, but I think I am the only person here who is of the Good Friday generation. I was born before it, and I have grown up through the Good Friday Agreement. And my life, even though I am still quite young, has been shaped by the Troubles. My uncle was killed, murdered by the British Army on the streets of Derry 50 years ago this week. And I feel that it is up to my generation and people my age that we have the opportunity now to make a real difference in the North. I feel that the Good Friday Agreement was supposed to be a part of a peace process, and I feel a lot of that, rather than building it up and making the Good Friday Agreement everything it could have been, I feel like it has been neglected, and people have been neglected, and it is young people who bear the brunt of that. We know from statistics that the North is the most dangerous place to be a woman in Europe. The rates of domestic violence are through the roof. We know that nationalist communities are policed different and they're more likely to be charged by the PSNI. We know that Ireland, as Derry, as Colin said, hits we are number one on every list that you do not want to be on. The Northwest, the rates of debt, the rates of people who are long-term unemployed. These are all things that we were promised were going to change, that the peace process was going to bring us a better opportunity and better future. But we know it's not just nationalist communities. Young loyalist boys have the worst educational outcomes in the North. So I do believe, when you look at the statistics, that partition has failed. And I am not really interested in a conversation about flags and anthems, because that to me we're completely missing the point. I would like to talk about a future that would give people better outcomes, to lift people out of poverty, to give young people an opportunity. The brain drain of brilliant young northern people who are leaving this island to go away to England or Australia or anywhere else to work is devastating, and it's not supposed to be this way. I feel that Stormont has let us down. I don't feel like the politicians have in any way protected the Good Friday Agreement and all the spoils of peace that we were supposed to reap. I don't believe that they've looked after that. So I'm interested in this conversation. People used to ask me, did I think I would ever see United Ireland? And I used to say it was like asking me if I believed in God. I was like, I don't really know. But I am very interested in a conversation about providing better outcomes for young people and everyone across the North. And we need this notion of the green and orange is a conversation for 20, 30 years ago. It's not realistic anymore, and I believe that every community, and also the in-betweeners, the people who consider themselves Northern Irish, British and Irish, need to be very much at the heart of this conversation. So I just wanted to say thanks very much for having me.
Thank you very much, Aoife. And finally, Declan.
Ar a chéad dul sios má bhuíochas de hothaí na hÉireann as ucht an déis seo a thuair dús a bheith páirteach an san díosbreacht fear huntasach seo inniu. And if I could also, at this stage, fully repudiate the sustained vilification of our fellow panellist, Colin Harvey, and the ongoing and the obscene trolling of our chairperson, Susan McKay. That despicable behaviour has no place in this society. So to begin, I believe that the momentum for constitutional change on this island has never been stronger. Discussion is taking place everywhere, in every parish, village, town and city, north, south, east and west. But the discussion that's taking place organically needs to be structured. So the time is right to establish a National Citizens' Assembly. And there is no sense any longer in the Irish government delaying in taking that decision. A Citizens' Assembly would create a platform which structures and scopes the discussion and gives Irish society an opportunity to develop the public policy priorities and also the frameworks that would need to underpin constitutional change when that comes about. My second reflection this afternoon is to say that in the immediate term, the discussion which is taking place needs to be nurtured right across Irish society, and inclusivity is absolutely key to how that is done, and in particular in terms of how we include those citizens in our society from Protestant and Unionist backgrounds. Increasing numbers of people from Protestant and Unionist backgrounds, in my view, are reassessing the political landscape. Directly as a result of Brexit, the protocol impasse, and I believe that that reassessment that is taking place privately is both to be commended and very much welcome. And I applaud those people from Protestant and Unionist backgrounds who have stepped into the public square to participate in this debate. I believe that those within our society are now looking for a new, pluralist, modernistic society which would give them an opportunity, through Irish unity, to find a way back into the European Union. And those opposed to progressive social transformation in Northern society should not have a veto on that debate or who becomes involved in those discussions. But the corollary to that is that those of us who are from a Republican, a nationalist, a progressive perspective in relation to constitutional change must also show great generosity and thought to how we participate in that discussion, and particularly with regard to how we engage with citizens from Protestant and Unionist backgrounds. At its core, this discussion is all about self-determination, and the Good Friday Agreement is the key to unlocking that. Turning to the change process in front of us, I believe that constitutional change is now firmly fixed on the horizon. It's no longer a case of if or when. The important question is, how do we take forward constitutional change on the island? And the milestones are clear. We should have a citizens' assembly. We should secure a unity referendum. We should have the debate surrounding that unity referendum in order to win it. And then there will be a process of preparing constitutional modalities towards transition to a new constitutional national democracy. And it needs to be an orderly transition, one which is about unlocking a society and an economy which is forward-looking, is inclusive, multicultural, and that, I believe, is the space we are now in. Irish unity is not just about the exercise of self-determination. I believe that new national and democratic arrangements on this island will be a modernising influence, similar to other huge, seminal, watershed social transformations that have taken place in Irish society in recent decades. We need to conceive of and embrace constitutional change as an unprecedented opportunity to redesign Irish society. And finally, this is a time for new discussions about what Ireland can become. Our focus should be on the new Ireland, not upon the discussions about the old Ireland. We need to plan, we need fresh thinking, and we need to focus in on the development of alliances and coalitions that will give us the momentum to move forward to bringing about the change. We need to learn from the experience of how we achieved marriage equality, the water charges campaign, the Repeal the Eighth campaign. These were inspirational campaigns of social transformation in our society that are relevant to how we make and effect constitutional change today. And I'm convinced that all of that is possible by harnessing the diversity of Irish society, building an exciting, democratic rainbow coalition which embraces every citizen and sector of our society to secure and win a referendum on constitutional change. And that's the importance of Táithí na hÉireann, Ireland's future, which has been to the fore of developing and expanding and facilitating these discussions. And I welcome this opportunity today, and I look forward to much more of these discussions being facilitated by Ireland's future in the future. Táithí and Jesh.
Thank you very much, Declan. So I think you'll agree that we've had a really interesting laying out of ground by the speakers. We're going to have a conversation among ourselves first, among the speakers rather, and then I'm going to bring in some questions that have come in from members of the audience. And if there's something that has come up that you'd like to comment on or ask a question on, you've still got time to do that. So I want to start with, Aoife, you mentioned about the fact that Derry is commemorating the 50th anniversary of Bloody Sunday at the moment, and it made me think as well, as I always do think when I'm in Derry, about Lyra McKee, who tragically lost her life here just 2 years ago, killed by people who were throwing things back into the conflict of the past rather than looking to the future that everybody on the panel has spoken about. But I remember Lyra saying, she wrote somewhere, "I don't care about a united Ireland, I don't care about securing the union, I just want a better life." And you've talked very much about how Derry has been disadvantaged, and Colin, I think, also spoke very clearly about that, you know, that partition has really had a huge impact on Derry in particular as a border city. It's interesting that in a poll that came out last year, it was among the young age group that the highest proportion of people talked about why they would want to vote for reunification. Can you talk to us a bit about that? Why do you think that half of young people today said that they would go for reunification if they got the chance to vote for it in the context of that deprivation in the Northwest?
I think people know that there are better opportunities out there. People in Derry know and across the Northwest know that other people have it better than them. We are not supposed to be forced to go away to England to work. My granddad went away to England to work, my daddy went away to England to work, and I went over to Scotland. That is not good enough. That's 3 generations of my family who've been forced to go away to find work, to leave Derry. I think we know the potential and opportunities that could be realised here if Derry could just get its opportunity. And it's not just Derry, like we know it's across the Northwest, and I would say even in the Republic, if you look at the neglect of Donegal, for instance, it's across the Northwest. So I don't for a minute think that if we got a united Ireland that suddenly that all our problems will be fixed, because if we're waiting on a train from Donegal this long, I'd say we're waiting on another one for one to Derry. But I would say that young people know that it doesn't have to be this way. I think the hunger for a united Ireland is more about a hunger for change, for more opportunities, more jobs. When I speak to my friends, and I've talked to my friends a lot about, a united Ireland, and when you come from a nationalist background, it's always something that kind of hums in the background, but you don't think about it very seriously. But my friends, people my age, are not talking about a united Ireland. They're talking about jobs, housing, healthcare, women's bodily autonomy, the right to want to stay and love where you are and have a good quality of life. So I think, of course, there is a romantic notion about a united Ireland, but I think a lot of it is a hunger for change because they know that something else better is out there. And you talked about Lyra, and I think she said best, one of her pieces, she said that, we were spared the horrors of war, but the spoils of peace haven't reached us yet. And I said that in my opening speech. The Good Friday Agreement was supposed to be something to build on. We weren't supposed to sign it and go and leave, and everything else was supposed to stay the same. So I think, of course, people do have a romantic notion about a united Ireland, but I think very much it is a hunger for change and a different type of politics and a different type of way of life for the rest of us.
Thanks, Aoife. And just staying on the Derry theme, because of course we're here in Derry today and people will expect us to talk about this in particular. I'd like to ask the 2 politicians about their views about, the key things that could be done for Derry in the future that will help the city to recover. And I'm thinking in particular about communications, which has been mentioned, the absence of good train services and so on, but also the university is a big issue here. Colin, could I come to you first on that?
Well, I think there's 2 tragedies in Derry that we're living through right now. One of them is the continued issue of emigration. Aoife's touched on it. My family, they're all gone. My brother's just come back from London after a long period, but the rest of them are away. There isn't a family in Derry that isn't touched by emigration. And mental health is a huge crisis. They're both, in my view, related to the economic situation that people find themselves and all of the difficulties that creates around health and mental health and just a lack of hope. And that, by the way, doesn't need a united Ireland to fix. I think we'd be in a better position if we did have a united Ireland. But it could be fixed soon, and that's why I talk about, I think, the fact that we have, and it's not a party political point, I just think we need to think more carefully about how we use the power that we have and the institutions that we have. I don't think we've used them properly or well enough. It is frankly shameful that we don't have a full-size university in the city. And it isn't about the students, it's about the economic impact that could have on this place. We know from every single report that's been done that this place, Derry, the northwest of Ireland, Donegal included, will never reach its full potential unless we have a proper third-level university here, doing the right kind of courses that are connected to the economy, keeping people here, creating jobs and businesses afterwards. There's lots of issues in this city. That's the number one issue. We have failed to deal with it since 1965. It's about time we get on with it. And I think the executive could do it. It's in the new decade new approach agreement. I was fairly strong on that during those negotiations. And I think it has to be delivered because people in this city are kind of fed up being told that they should accept accept second best. We've had enough of accepting second best, and we deserve a lot better. And I, for one, want to see our young people staying here, contributing to community life, family life, and the economic life of this city. And I think we have huge potential. And that potential will be greater if we are connected properly across this island.
Thanks, Colin. Declan, can I put that to you? The executive could do it. The executive could get us a university in Derry. Do you believe that's the case? And if it is, will it happen?
I do. But I think it's important to set all of this in context. The historic underinvestment and discrimination against Derry in the northwest is a legacy of partition. It's synonymous with the injustices of partition and the existence of a one-party orange state in this part of the island. And I believe that the university itself is an iconic instance of not only that discrimination and underinvestment, but it is also going to be iconic as an acid test of the just transformation of this part of our island to ensure that the Northwest and Derry in particular does in fact secure that university, that it plays the essential role that it will have, not just in relation to enhancing educational opportunities for our young people, but as a vital part of the economic regeneration and the future of Derry itself. And the executive is committed to ensuring that that happens. My party is absolutely committed to ensuring that that is delivered upon. I think that good progress has been made, but we're not there yet. The acid test has to be achieved. This Thursday I spent the day in Derry visiting the Ebrington site, where there is huge investment taking place, which I believe will have a multiplier effect in relation to the regeneration of Derry and the Northwest in itself. Some fantastic innovations taking place among local businesses, all located on that site. These are signs of hope, but ultimately, this is a low-wage economy. Derry is a particular example of that. We live on these islands in this region with the lowest levels of health and mental well-being, living conditions, and our people are subject to 0 hours contracts, precarious work and low wages. So this must be seen as part of a multifaceted economic and social transformation of this part of the island in the context of what I believe needs to be a more equal island overall. And economic reconstruction and economic justice must be at the very core of constitutional change.
Okay, thank you. I want to turn to you, Patricia, on the issue of legacy, which is something which sort of underlies almost every issue that we can talk about, I think, in relation to the Northern Ireland. I mean, Declan was talking about how Sinn Féin recognises that there needs to be a generosity towards unionists, but it strikes me that one of the barriers to having a full conversation about a new Ireland is the fact that so many people from the unionist community feel wounded and fearful because of the legacy of the IRA. What do you think can be done to sort out legacy in such a way that it doesn't keep dragging us back?
Well, I think if you look at where we are today in Derry, a week away from the 50th anniversary of Bloody Sunday, the lessons that have come from that and how the Bloody Sunday families dealt with the issues around that are something that we can show, you know, as an exemplar of how we deal with legacy issues. I mean, the families had a very strong campaign for a public inquiry, but the fact that we're still here 50 years later commemorating this tragedy through a series of events shows that, you know, legacy issues haven't disappeared. You know, there's a natural expectation that following the apology of the British government that there would be accountability for the murders that happened on the streets here, and the fact that that hasn't happened means that there is unfinished business, and that's something that is echoed across so many different, you know, collective events and individual events of tragedy that happened during the conflict. We're sitting now, I mean, when I was in the Victims' Commission in 2012, there was a recommendation that the seriously injured would receive financial payments, and the injured pension scheme hasn't even rolled out yet 10 years later. So we do have to deal with legacy, but we have to deal with it in a way that, you know, we can't make the mistakes that were made in the Good Friday Agreement and the St Andrews Agreement and say, you know, we're going to do it, but not put a plan in place. The plan is in place there in the Stormont House Agreement that the parties signed up to, and it needs to be implemented so that we can begin to tackle those issues. We need to do that in a way that reassures unionism that, you know, the wrong that was done, the harm that was done isn't forgotten, it isn't taken for granted. You know, that we accept that so many people within this society have been impacted by the horrors of the conflict and continue to be, because we have a huge issue around transgenerational trauma. This is why, you know, someone like Aoife is so impacted by Bloody Sunday, you know, because her uncle was murdered on that day, and the legacy of that continues to impact her family, despite the fact that she wasn't even born, because she knows and she sees what has gone on. And I think she can speak in a much more articulate way about that than I ever could. But we have to understand that those issues need to be dealt with. We cannot say it's something we're going to do as part of a new Ireland, you know, and then fail to do it. We need to do it now. So
But that is in fact what has happened, isn't it? I mean,
what's continually happened with each set of agreements is, oh, Stormont House, you know, hasn't been implemented. St Andrews, we said we will do something for victims, and we didn't really. And the same with the Good Friday Agreement. You know, all of them made sort of very vague, waffly promises about what would happen in order to deal with legacy issues. But we also have to remember that the biggest obstacle to dealing with legacy issues has been the British government. And I think Clara Riley from Relatives for Justice puts it much more articulately. And she says that, you know, the truth costs nothing. Concealing the truth is what has cost money. And I think that the money that has been spent on dealing with legacy issues has long been brought up by unionist politicians particularly as something that is seen as unfair. But it shouldn't be viewed in that way, because you have to remember that there's, you know, we have the number of people that have been convicted and have served prison sentences for conflict-related offences. And people are being forced into dealing with legacy issues through mechanisms such as inquests and public inquiries. That shouldn't have had to happen. So let's look at the agreements that have been put in place, the structures that the political parties signed up to during the negotiations around Stormont House, and put that into place so that we can finally say to victims and survivors of the conflict, you know, we feel your pain as a society, and we want to ensure you that we will do what we can to acknowledge that and to make the best reparation that we can to you and your family, so that we don't continue this into another generation of trauma.
Thanks, Patricia. Colin, I want to ask you about, in a way, the same thing. Like, what can organisations like Ireland's Future, that, you know, you talked about having inclusive conversations with people who radically disagree with each other. What can organisations like Ireland's Future and others do to promote conversation with people from the unionist background in particular, who fear and dread the reunification of Ireland and think that it's going to mean the end of their distinct identity?
I'd like to start, Susan, by expressing my solidarity with the Bloody Sunday families at this time and the difficult weeks ahead, and everyone affected by Bloody Sunday on the day and since then. What I tried to underline in my remarks is something that I know many people are thinking about right now, is that they're joining this discussion because they don't see a marketing label, New Ireland, right? They don't see it as a corporate brand. They're taking it seriously. So my first plea in my opening remarks was, you better mean it, right? You better mean it, because you're holding out to people who need change to happen here across all communities. And let me add my voice to the fact that Derry doesn't have a university is a scandal. The Northwest needs a revolution in higher education to happen now, and that would have transformative impact on this city and this region, and it's scandalous that it hasn't happened already. People want change and they want transformation, and they're entering this conversation for those reasons. And I think that's the way that you do it, in a sense that you're promising something better. All the evidence that I have seen is that we will be better off in new arrangements on the island of Ireland, that the promises are for constitutional change. That includes, if you're serious about that, equality, human rights, social justice, and climate justice. That applies to absolutely everyone. Many activists out there, and you know this, Susan, now, are not organising themselves along traditional labels and lines, and they don't see themselves at all in those terms. They're looking at what's happening in the dysfunctional, shambolic mess in the north. They're noting that equality, rights, social justice, climate justice has been some of the biggest casualties of the system here. So I think many people are entering this conversation as an opportunity for a genuine fresh start in the north in particular. So what I would say is there has to be an open invitation to people, a warm invitation to participate in the discussion. I want to refute the idea that there are not people from a unionist or Protestant background engaging in this conversation. There are. I know that from projects I'm involved in. That is happening now. People are engaging in conversations about multiple constitutional futures, not necessarily one outcome, but they are doing that already, and more people are welcome to that discussion. But I want to just follow on by saying this. If you take mutual respect seriously, the invitation has to be warm and open to everyone to participate. But we have to accept and acknowledge that for many in the unionist community, particularly in political unionism, quite rightly, they will be getting on with making the case for the union. It's not obvious to me as somebody here that they've started yet, but that's the job of work that political unionism will largely be doing. And I think the focus needs to turn, really. And what I'd like to do today really is put out a call to political unionism to show a bit of leadership in the year ahead, to be generous, to begin to make the case for the union. People will have other constitutional views, and people need to understand that many unionists will not want to design a united Ireland, but those proposing constitutional change need to make it clear in the guarantees and assurances that are put down that the proposition will be warm, open and welcoming, and a new Ireland will be a safe space for everyone if that's the eventual outcome. But I think those conversations are happening. They're accelerating. Some of the things we're seeing are a reaction to that. And I think, as I've said, that's where we're going in the time end. Just to end, final point.
Very quickly.
I think
Colin,
sometimes New Irelanders, United Irelanders are the greatest procrastinators in the world. And I think ultimately, if you're proposing a new Ireland, you better be serious, but you better get on with doing the work. You know, and I think we're in a period of time in the time ahead when political unionism will do its thing primarily, but those who are proposing constitutional change need to just get on doing the planning and preparation and building the case, proposing a manifesto, prospectus, whatever you want to call it, for a new Ireland, putting it on the table and making that as generous, inclusive, and expansive as possible.
Okay, thanks. Patricia, you wanted to have a quick word there.
I think it's important, that, as I said in my opening remarks, it's about reassuring people that their identity is cherished. And if there is a new constitutional dispensation on this island, people who identify as Ulster-British will still be Ulster-British, and no one is asking them to change that identity. What we're saying is the opportunity exists for that identity to be protected, to become part of a new definition of Irishness. So we have a huge responsibility, everyone who advocates for change, to say to people of an Ulster-British identity, I respect that, and I want to see how we can best integrate that and protect that identity in a new Ireland.
Somebody has just said here, 1 million. Where does that statistic come from, Patricia?
Well, and it's based on the most recent census in the Republic of Ireland, and also an estimation that there'd probably be a similar number, around 1 in 10 people in the north of Ireland who were not born on this island, and that's based on demographics from NISRA. So it's a cobbled together statistics, but it is more or less there.
Thanks, Patricia. I'm going to turn now to some of the questions that have been coming in from the public. Some of them we've actually covered already. There's one here which is for the two politicians, Declan and Colin, and this is from Niamh in Derry. And Niamh says, broadly speaking, the nationalist people don't like to see Sinn Féin and the SDLP working against each other and clashing. I have moved my vote between Sinn Féin and the SDLP at various elections. Whilst mindful individual party politics will always feature, could the SDLP and Sinn Féin try to arrive on the same ground on the issue of how we advance the United Ireland conversation, much in the same way as Neil Richmond and Jim O'Callaghan have arrived broadly on the same ground on this issue? Niamh is referring to two politicians in the Republic there. So, in whatever order you choose.
Well, I think in any democratic society you're allowed to have differences of opinion, and we should have different political parties in this island, because I don't want a new Ireland that has a one or two party state. I mean, I think that is one of the good things that we have here, is that we could a pluralism of opinion. Do we all, as disparate viewpoint, disparate voices, need to come together at a point and offer a solution and a perspective? Absolutely. But the previous question about legacy, and we have to be realistic about this. We have to convince an awful lot of people who don't currently want to vote for United Ireland to vote for it. And many of those people have got serious hurt and pain because of what the IRA did, in the same way that the Bloody Sunday families that I was with yesterday have an enormous amount of hurt and pain. And I don't believe that we can do this without properly dealing with the legacy of the past, because we cannot continue to have this being about the past. It has to be about the future, but it doesn't go away. We've learned that for over 20 years since the Good Friday Agreement. It gets worse and worse. It infects the current politics, and it will infect this debate in a way that I'm not sure we're prepared for. So that's why I believe fully in truth and justice. I want it from the British government. I want it from the IRA as well, because every victim out there deserves to know what happened. But even more importantly, society deserves to know what happened, so that we can actually put it behind us and move forward. So I think there's a value in what Declan's party can bring to this debate. I think there's a particular value that the SDLP can bring to this debate in reaching across the divide and speaking to people. I agree with Colin. Unionists will be unionists, and they should be. I want them to come up with a good plan for saving the union. I think our plan will be better, and we can have a democratic discussion about it, and I think we'll win the day. But we have to be able to speak to them. There are lots of conversations going on. Most of them are quiet conversations. We're engaged in extensive conversations with people from different backgrounds, and we'll continue to do that. I think we're quite well placed, actually, because for lots of historical reasons, to do that. Probably better placed than Declan's party, to be honest, in that. And I think we'll all bring different things to this discussion. This will not be one by one political party. This will have to take lots of different political parties, lots of different interest groups to come together. That's how marriage equality was won. That's how Repeal the Eighth was won. It's bringing people together with different viewpoints and talking to different parts of the country and different constituencies. I think there's a strength in that, actually.
Okay, so Declan, the question has obviously broadened out there, because Colin has referred back to the legacy issue, which of course I'd like you to refer to as well. But also the question that Niamh has asked is about Sinn Féin and the SDLP finding common ground in addressing the question of unification. So could you talk about those two issues, or those sets of issues, I suppose you would say?
Absolutely. We need to address and resolve the legacy of the past in our society, and Sinn Féin has put forward very far-reaching and ambitious proposals, the culmination of which, I believe, needs to be that in the context of a new constitutional democracy on the island, we place reconciliation and healing at the very core of our political and our civic institutions, and that is the defining issue as we move forward in the creation of new governmental arrangements. Irish unity, constitutional change, that is the defining issue of our generation. And to that extent then, I think that we need to find common ground across the greatest possible cross-section of political and civic opinion. And to that extent then, of course, those parties on the national democratic spectrum will continue to identify themselves differently from an ideological and a political perspective. But we do have a duty to find common ground in order to bring forward an effective and a deliverable agenda for change that influences the direction of this society. Because in the context of Irish reunification, no one party has a monopoly on how we bring that about. It will be a common purpose, and it needs to be a common purpose on behalf of wider society. So we carry a huge burden of responsibility, I believe, to work together. Sinn Féin, the SDLP, Fianna Fáil, the Labour Party, Fine Gael, and other parties across this island who aspire to constitutional change and Irish unity, to work together in a very collaborative and a collegiate way. It will not make us different. We will continue to have our differences as political parties, but I think the key, you see, in a period of change like this, is that we recognise that cynical politics diminishes us all, and it diminishes the political process, and that our focus must in fact be upon collegiality, finding common ground, giving leadership, and that will be decisive, I believe, in how we reach out to others within our society who are not yet convinced. And my last point, Susan, would be that it's not just about finding common cause and common ground among parties which are on the broadly progressive, national and democratic spectrum. This is going to be a societal endeavour. This is the defining moment of our time. This is the defining issue of our time. Politicians alone should not and cannot deliver constitutional change. This must be embraced by Irish society as a whole.
Okay, thanks, Declan. There's a question. I mean, I know all of you could talk on this particular issue, but there's another question here which is specifically for Aoife, and this is from Sean in Limerick. And Sean says, living and working in the South but having grown up in the North, how do you convince people in the South that Irish unity is the best way forward? In recent polls, it is stated that 62% of people in the South support a united Ireland. However, 79% of people were put off at the thought of having to pay higher taxes in the event of a united Ireland. Polls also show a lack of willingness to compromise on symbolic issues such as a new flag or a national anthem. What do you think the Southern Government can do in terms of educating people that a united Ireland is actually more likely to make people, North and South, financially better off?
What a question.
Well, you've already addressed some of it, I think, because you talked about you're not very concerned about issues of flags and so on. But
I would say, and I work obviously in Dáil Éireann, and there is a very clear feeling in Dáil Éireann that they are not going to frighten the horses. I find it very strange that the British government, as a co-guarantor of the Good Friday Agreement, will often make a case for the union, but it has been seen in Dublin, I don't know whether they think it would be bad-mannered or not their place, that rarely make an argument for a united Ireland. There have been some moves, I suppose, like Micheál Martin had started his shared island unit, and it has been, a lot of money has been pumped into it, but it was very much seen at the time as a sop to say Fianna Fáil are still the Republican Party, we still want a united Ireland, but we're not going to say it out loud. It has been criticised by my own newspaper as a bit of a talking shop with not much else going on behind it. Convincing people, most people I think that I meet in the South like the idea of a united Ireland. You know, it's something people will think, yeah, we'll get there eventually, but there doesn't seem to be any great hunger for it to happen right now. I think it will always come down to issues we talked about, tax and income. I was a journalist in Scotland for years, and I covered the independence referendum when I lived in Glasgow, and most of the people that you spoke to day were not talking about the flag or the anthem. They were talking about their pension, they were talking about their income, what money they were going to spend. These are the conversations I think are much more worth having. I understand there is a way to go to convince the loyalist and unionist communities that there would be a place for them in a united Ireland, but I am much more convinced about the problems that we have here and now that might be solved by united Ireland. So I think there needs to be serious amounts of research done. I know from my own Freedom of Information requests that the Department of Justice in Dublin doesn't even have a united Ireland on their risk assessment, but they do have one for Scottish independence. So that is how far away Dublin is from thinking about a united Ireland. But I would also say that governments are always, and the same in Dublin as they were with marriage equality and repealing the the government is always behind the people when it comes to these things. The conversation has moved on without Belfast and without Dublin, and as Tom said, people are talking amongst themselves about the constitutional change and the potential it could have. How to convince people? I think we might, even at the base level of research that would be done of how this would work, that's the kind of work that needs to be done. It needs to be funded by the government in Dublin. If they are serious about a united Ireland, there needs to be a white paper done about the financial outcomes that we could possibly see in a united Ireland, because all of our talk about flags and what football team we're going to have is pointless if people don't know how much money they're going to have in their bank at the end of the day, because people just want to get up and go to work and look after their children and have a good quality of life. And I don't think for most people they would give up a good quality of life just to say that they live in a united Ireland.
I'd like to actually ask all of you on that. The question was specifically for Aoife, but so I'd ask the rest of you to be fairly brief in your response to this. But just why is it that the Irish government appears to be quite reticent, to say the least, about getting involved in this conversation? We'll start with yourself, Patricia, because I interrupted you there.
Well, I think there's, the Irish government would probably say it has enough on its plate dealing with the impact of Brexit and dealing with the global pandemic to be publishing white papers, and it's on the agenda, but it's not at the top of the list, and that's me being gracious about it. But I think on the issue of unity, and when you ask someone in a poll, are you prepared to pay more taxes, it doesn't matter what you're being asked to pay more taxes for. The answer will always be no. Always be no. So let's not, let's set that issue aside for a minute. But I think what government does need to realise in Dublin is that, it's almost at, the Republic of Ireland is almost at the as far as it can go in terms of economic growth and development. There is not enough affordable housing to attract more multinational inward investment. If you come out of Dublin Airport and turn right, it takes you an hour to get to Sandyford Industrial Estate, where so many global companies, multinational corporations, have their European headquarters. If you come out of Dublin Airport and turn left, within 50 minutes you're in Uri, and you have access to a potential workforce of around 1 million people between Uri and Drogheda, and you have more affordable housing. You have the ability to build more housing that's affordable for a workforce that could be attracted into that area. So I think what we need to do is we need to look to business, and we need to look to international businesses and say, this is why a united Ireland would be good for business, good for the economy, because there is more income to be made there.
Okay, good, but could we just go back to that particular question that was asked, though, about the Irish government and its attitude to the situation?
I think the way to do that is to bring in the ESRI to do more economic research, to look at the actual cash value of reunification in terms of the tax that would be generated, both in terms of corporation tax, more income, because more people will be in higher net worth jobs. Okay,
thanks, Patricia. Colin? The Irish government in particular, and just fairly briefly, if you can.
Look, I was clear at the start. I'm making a call for the Irish government to show leadership. This could be triggered from London. We don't want Ireland led from London. We want Ireland led from Ireland. So the Irish government needs to lead. But let me say this. Look, the history of peace process is the Irish government will catch up with the rest of us, right? Because the reality of this island is civil society leads, government follows afterwards. Not only does government follow afterwards, they'll claim the credit and they'll say it was their idea in the first place. Everything we're talking about is in the Good Friday Agreement, which everybody loves, and everything we're talking about today is the Irish Constitution as well. They'll catch up, they'll take over, they'll claim the credit, but we all know that civil society leads these conversations on this island in the past, present and the future.
Well, the late Inez McCormack, whose 9th anniversary was yesterday, said that sometimes things worked better if you didn't have to take the credit. So maybe we should bear that in mind. Colin, what do you think in terms of the Irish government in particular? And again, I'd ask you to be quite brief because we've quite a lot of other questions here.
Well, I think there's a natural reticence in Dublin to talk about some of these issues because they feel like they have to be reaching out to unionism. And that's right, in one way. But I think there's a slight misunderstanding of what unionists are like. I think they like straight talking. I think they think we're all at it anyway. And I think we may as well be straight with them about it. And I find those kind of conversations go a lot better when they think, unless they think you're kind of trying to get one round them and trying to go around the back. I think the shared island unit is actually very significant. It will do an awful lot of work. It may be a lot of talking, there's a lot of talking to be done. But there's also billions of pounds in a bank account now to be spent on physical projects across this island, which will be very beneficial if we're trying to build people and bring people with us. Of course, it has to move to the next stage. The Irish government have to lead this, have to be at the centre of this, have to help fund a lot of this. I think they will. As Colin says, I think they always do get there in most of the big significant moments in the peace process. If you look back, the Irish government had to be central to all of that. I think we'll get there. I would just say to everybody, straight talking is the best way to speak to everybody on this island, especially people in the north, whether you're unionists or nationalists. We don't like kind of, mixed message. We like people being straight with us and arguing with them up front. It's a far better way of discussing this issue, I think.
So, Declan, what do you think? And you might also talk about, how things will be different given that Sinn Féin is actually on course to become a much bigger player in the government in the Republic, as well as appearing that it's going to be the biggest party in the north. So that may change, obviously, the way the Irish government approaches this. But could you speak first about how things are at the moment with the Irish government on this question?
Outwardly, the government position is now is not the right time. I think that increasingly that argument is running out of road, if it hasn't already run out of road as a publicity line. If you look at Fianna Fáil, Fine Gael, and indeed the Green Party as the coalition in government, the governmental policy is out of step with the actual feeling within those three political parties, where there is a clear resonance within the parties at a grassroots level, and indeed within the parliamentary groups, in support of Irish reunification and taking the sensible steps towards constitutional change. And I said in my earlier remarks that there is now no logic, there is no further justification for the Irish government not to proceed with the convening of a citizens' assembly as one of those milestones that we could take in a very orderly, responsible, inclusive way to structure the discussion. The government policy is also out of step with wider society. It's not where opinion and discourse is at. So it needs to catch up in relation to the discussion that's taken place across this island, and indeed it needs to reflect, I believe, the actual position of the memberships of the three coalition parties. It's also out of step in relation to the broad international context and perspective on what is happening in Ireland. I have never seen so much engaged international and diplomatic opinion in relation to what's happening in Ireland at the moment. I attended meetings with the diplomatic corps in Dublin and in London over the course of the last fortnight. Our party would do these meetings on a regular basis, 3-4 times a year. We never have had the numbers in attendance from the diplomatic corps at either of those meetings in the past. And clearly international opinion is reflecting on where Ireland is at and what Irish reunification and constitutional change would mean for geopolitical relations, particularly this side of Western Europe. I believe it will be very constructive and positive. I think we can actually help stabilise the economic disruption and instability that's been caused by Brexit by achieving constitutional change and Irish reunification in this part of Ireland. I think it'll be a stabilising influence with a united Ireland going back into the European Union as a result. In terms of our own party position, yes, the prospect, and it is only a prospect because the people will determine what parties go into government and what mandate and size of mandate they command. But there is a prospect, yes, of Sinn Féin doing very well in the Assembly elections this May. There is the prospect in time of Sinn Féin going into government and leaving opposition to become a lead party of government in the 26 counties. That'll be a game changer, in my opinion, for the political landscape across the island. I would much prefer, however, that rather than waiting on Sinn Féin being in government north and south to bring about these changes, that the Irish government acted now, establish a National Citizens' Assembly that's commenced the process of stepping across these milestones. And then, yes, I do believe the prospect of Sinn Féin in government north and south would be a very important harbinger of further constitutional change, and on a very constructive, positive basis.
Thanks, Declan. There's a question here about the NHS, and I think I saw a poll which showed that it's actually one of the main reasons that unionists give for wanting to remain part of the United Kingdom is the existence of the NHS. But there obviously is people in the north are constantly shocked by the fact that you've got to pay 50, 60 quid to go to the doctor in the Republic, even if it's only something that is rather minor. But this person, Patricia in Belfast, says, the NHS in the north is crumbling. The situation will get worse before it gets better. Does the argument around the health service in a united Ireland not need to be developed beyond a simple, we need an all-Ireland NHS? So the question goes on beyond that, but I think I'd just like to ask each of you to reflect on that. Obviously health has very much come to the fore of all of our minds because of the pandemic and the burden that was put on the health service and on its workers over the last 2 years. But just maybe starting with you again, Aoife, is the NHS a thing that, well, just to address the question of the NHS and why people in the north are so reluctant to give it up, even though, as Patricia says, it seems to be crumbling?
Yeah, we know that the health service in the north is under serious pressure, but the NHS is the best thing that was ever created. I would say it's not just unionists. My own mammy, I'm sure, wouldn't mind me saying that she would quite like a united Ireland, but she has told me in no uncertain terms that she will not be paying to go to the doctors. It is not something that northern people want to give up, nor should they give up. I would also make the point that in the south, I live in Dublin, the first time I went to the doctors, I was out the door and the receptionist had to call me back and say, there's a card machine there and you need to pay to go to the doctors. It's €60 every time I go to the doctors. That's even if I want a repeated prescription, I have to go back and pay €60. I would also say that the health service in the south is not, because you're paying for it, any better. It is also buckling. It is under seriously dysfunctional management. We have trolley numbers that are through the roof every winter. So it's not to say that because you're paying for it, you're going to get a better outcome, because I actually find that you don't. There is a plan in place. It was a cross-party agreement in the Irish government for sláinte care, which would be a move towards universal healthcare in the south. They thought that with the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic, it would force the hand of the government to implement more of the recommendations for sláinte care. That has not really been the case. I don't feel that we're any way further on to realising the recommendations for the sláinte care report. So I would say that if they haven't even got it together now, I don't know how many years we're on from the sláinte care report, if they haven't got it together now, we will be waiting a while before we know what we're going to do in a united Ireland. But I think healthcare will be the main thing in the north. Constantly people will bring up, but I cannot see any great shifts in Dublin to implement sláinte care immediately, and I feel like this is going to be a stickler in any conversation we have going forward, because it may very well be the case that if it comes to the constitutional question, northern people will be forced into the HSE, which means that they'll have to end up paying for the doctors, and that's not what people want.
Yeah. Anybody else on the panel want to look at that column?
I mean, I think Aoife's absolutely right. If I was running the anti-unity campaign, I'd just be running ads about how much it costs to go to the doctors, and my own mother would have some difficult conversations about that. But we have to be realistic. This isn't going to if there was a referendum tomorrow, it all doesn't change the next day. There'd be a serious transition period in terms of health, pensions, all these issues. But I also think we have to be realistic. I mean, my office is inundated with people who are languishing on waiting lists for years upon years. It is absolutely shocking. The health service is at the point of collapse. We have to be serious about this. It really is. That has to be fixed regardless of whether we're in a new Ireland or still within the UK. But it is not quite the argument that it used to be. I mean, I am a massive supporter of the NHS. I want to see healthcare free at the point of delivery, but I also want people to get access to that health service. And if they can't get access to that health service, I think the conversation begins to change a wee bit. And I do know some people who have moved across the border and they're pretty happy to pay the fee. I'm not advocating this, but they're happier to pay it if they can get access, whereas many people up here can't get anywhere near a doctor. And I think that is a huge issue regardless of this campaign. But yes, look, the idea that we could run a campaign, get into it saying, you know, you're going to have to pay €60 or whatever it is to see a doctor, we will lose the campaign on that alone. I think, and that's talking to ordinary nationalists, never mind unionists.
Okay, Patricia?
The historic underinvestment in the health service north and south has left us in a position where when we faced a global pandemic, everything else got so much worse and waiting lists just grew by 2 years. And the NHS in the north does not have good outcomes for patients compared to any other region where people access services through the National Health Service. My simple plan, and I think governments north and south need to be really looking at how we redesign a healthcare system, and my simple plan is halve the number of managers, double the number of nurses and doctors, and pay them a decent salary so that they don't end up leaving the country.
And do you agree with Aoife and with Colin that it is a serious deterrent to the notion of buying into the idea of a united Ireland?
It is, but I don't want to prop up a National Health Service that doesn't have decent health outcomes for the community, and that's what we have right now, and it's just not good enough. So that's why in the Ireland is an opportunity to design something better that actually meets need and is free at the point of delivery.
Okay, Colin, would you like to contribute on the question of the NHS? And
look, some principles and values, many principles and values are absolutely right, independent of where they derive from, and people are absolutely right to be proud of the NHS in a UK context, absolutely right. The reality is starkly different in the north at the moment, as has already been outlined. It's falling apart, it's collapsing. That takes me on, ultimately, the question of transformation has got to involve socio-economic change. Mentioned a Bill of Rights for in the here and now. Well, the proposals from the Human Rights Commission did include a right to healthcare, for example, as part of that. And I would certainly expect to see a right to healthcare feature very, very prominently in any proposals for a Bill of Rights or new human rights protections. I think Irish constitutional system, the Irish legal system is weak on socio-economic rights guarantees. So both in designing a new healthcare system and making a coherent proposition, but also constitutionally, things like housing, healthcare, they need to be reflected firmly at the heart of new constitutional arrangements. It's also worth pointing out that Ireland's Future has produced a number of publications thus far, but it's interesting to note that Ireland's Future is working on a major policy intervention in the area of healthcare, exactly to address the sort of concerns that you've highlighted there.
thanks, Colin. Declan, do you want to say anything on the question of an all-Ireland health system?
Health is pivotal. It's the one public service that we will rely upon from the cradle to the grave. But if we come at this conversation from the premise that it is simply about taking the north and bolting it onto what exists in the south, then I think that's a false start to the conversation. So health needs to be understood as a right in the first instance, and constitutional change needs to be set in the context of a rights-based constitutional democracy. Therefore, you secure the right to health, and I make no apology for saying this, from a left Republican, from a socially progressive point of view, then we need to see sustainable services that are geared towards serving citizens that are people-centred and that secure health and quality health services free at the point of delivery for every citizen. That means that we have to recalibrate our thinking in relation to how we move towards Irish unity. And there will be a transition beyond the winning of a unity referendum towards the creation of a new constitutional democracy. And that's the point in time in the conversation where widespread civic participation will be most key, because we need to ensure that our approach to that change and transformation is rights-based, that it is inclusive, and that it's focused on the delivery of sustainable public services in a new Irish society.
Okay, thanks. We're running out of time, so I'm actually just going to ask each of you to speak for about a minute about, what you think the next steps should be in terms of moving this debate on. I know that Ireland's Future is going to be having further debates in other towns and cities around the country, and you can find those on its social media. But just for now in this debate, what would each of you say is the next step, or make whatever comment you want to make as a conclusion to this discussion? I'll just start with you, Patricia.
I think we need to continue to attract more people into this dialogue, because it's important that we identify the issues that are at the heart of people's concerns. We are, without doubt, in a state of flux, and Brexit has kind of accelerated the pace of constitutional change and the desire for constitutional change in many people's minds. So let's talk to people, let's engage with their concerns, let's continue to lobby governments, north and south, to ensure that we have the appropriate plans in place. The Irish government needs to plan for the future, and it needs to take cognizance of the concerns of not just the unionist community, but everyone on this island.
Okay, thanks, Patricia. Colin?
I suppose in my professional role as an academic in that context, I'd really make a call to universities across this island, and also universities across these islands and beyond, to participate in the discussion, to feel free to do so, because I have a very, very strong belief that academics should not just sit in libraries, although that's important as well, but should actually engage in the public sphere and shouldn't be fearful of doing so. I know that can be difficult at times, but I do think universities have a role for this reason that I tried to emphasise, and we've all been emphasising, planning and preparing for where we're going next. Everybody wants to get this right. Nobody wants to have a situation here where people are painting lies on buses. Yeah. People want an evidence-based, planned approach. They want to know what they're voting for, and they want to know what the consequences. They want an informed choice. And I want to commend people on this panel, in Ireland's Future, people in civil society, politicians, because in response to Brexit, in response to the utter provocation that has been forced on this island, people have responded in a noble and dignified way, with integrity, with solutions, with trying to find evidence-based, informed ways forward. Universities are central to that. So I call on universities throughout this island, funding bodies, fund the research, do the work, so as that we can be prepared, well-resourced, planned. The evidence is there. People know that we're what they're voting for. So join in. Look, I'm going to continue doing that work. I'm not going to be going away from this conversation, but we need more academics to be engaged and involved. The invitation is there. It's a warm and welcome invitation. But really, I just want to commend everybody. There's remarkable work being done. As I've said in a running analogy, rather poor running analogy earlier, that we're on a journey. We're not that far off. So we need people to get involved in the work that's ongoing now.
Thanks, Colin. Colin.
Thanks. Well, look, there's a couple of things. I mean, both Declan and I talked about the transition period that would be after. I just want to make something clear, though. I don't believe that we can wait until after a referendum to begin to make it very clear what this is going to look like on the other side, because on that, if we do that, we will lose. We have to make a very clear pitch. Remember, I always say this, the SNP had over 900 pages of a document, addressed every single issue and still lost, and they don't have the difficulties that we have. So we need to be very clear in the planning. I mean, we're doing that, and Ireland's Future doing that. I'm sure Sinn Féin do it. But we have to all do that work. But we have to give people a very, very clear perspective as to what this is going to look like on the other side. Not what's going to look like the very next day after a referendum, but we need to be very clear. It is the Brexit example that we need to look at. We also, I think, as a secondary point, need to look at what's going on across these islands. Scotland, I think, will be extraordinarily significant in this conversation, because if Scotland goes, it changes the dynamics. The UK doesn't exist anymore at that point. We also, though, need to be very aware that we have a British government in London who are corrupt, corrosive, will do anything that is outside of the normal playbooks that national governments should do, and at any point they could call a referendum in order to shore up the union. So we have to be cognizant of that. We have to be prepared for that. We shouldn't play that into their hands. And I think we continue to do the work. We prepare, we speak, and most importantly, we listen to people. And I would appeal to everybody, whilst we need to deal with the legacy issue, the conversation has to be about the future, because the people that we need to convince to win any future referendum are people who are concerned with the type of society that we're going to have. Will it be fair? Will it be more liberal? Will it be European? Will it be open? Will it be part of all the positive things that have happened in 26 counties over the past 100 years? That is, I think, the selling point. That is what will bring young people. That is what will bring people who were formerly unionist or from a unionist background. It's what will bring some nationalist people who are concerned and nervous about all the issues we've talked about. So it has to be future focused, has to be ambitious and progressive. And I think in that we have an opportunity to set out a vision for the future that unfortunately other generations never got to do. And it is a huge responsibility, but it's a huge opportunity as well.
Thanks, Colin. Now, because I'm a journalist and a feminist, I want to give Aoife the last word and not give the last word to a politician. So I'm going to ask Declan next and then finish with Aoife.
I think we have to approach the conversation and the time ahead with great determination, but also great optimism and positivity. There are historic opportunities to be shaped and harnessed going forward. So we need to de-weaponise the discussion around Irish reunification and constitutional change. It needs to be mainstreamed. I think we have to deepen it right across every sector of Irish society. It's important, I think, that those who espouse constitutional change, who approach this discussion from a pro-Irish unity perspective, work much more closely together, both within politics and also wider civic society, particularly with a view to removing the fears and the apprehensions and some of the dishonesty that impacts on this discussion, so that we can all come to this in a secure and a safe way, and particularly people from a Protestant and Unionist backgrounds feel that they can shape and own and participate in the debate. And finally, this needs to be seen as how we self-determine our future. And yes, I believe the landing zone is Irish unity and a new constitutional democracy. But the really exciting thing about what is happening in Irish society at the moment is that I believe this is about the modernisation of Irish society. And I'm firmly of the view that new democratic and national arrangements on this island, serving our people as a whole, will have a profoundly modernising and constructive effect on what Ireland in the future is going to look like.
Thanks, Declan. And finally, Aoife, if you want to give us your concluding thoughts on this for today.
Yeah, in my line of work, everything that we do is evidence-based. It's based on the data, it's based on the statistics, and I would really like to see the work being done now and the planning being done now if the ball is rolling for Irish reunification. What I do not want is the North to be subsumed into the Republic and just become part of the Republic with, you know, the hangover from the rule of the Catholic Church. And on the other side of it is I don't want the Republic subsumed into the North and the hangover that we have from the Troubles. There is an opportunity here to take the best things from both districts and put it together and give people a better chance at life. And I would like to see the work being done now by politicians in Dublin and in Belfast to get the ball rolling now and make more opportunities for young people. I know I keep talking about young people, but when we're all gone, they are going to be the people who are left. And I really believe that if people are serious about this now, that they need to get off the fence and do the work. As Colin says, the SNP did the work and they still lost. You need to be able, all the talk of orange marches and everything else to do with your culture will mean nothing if you cannot tell people if they'll have to pay to go to the doctors, how much their rent is going to be, what the tax is going to be like. So I would like to see the evidence base now of where we're headed, and I would like to see obviously more work from the Irish government, because as Colin said as well, this is London's decision. London could decide tomorrow. Boris Johnson is the most erratic Prime Minister I think that the UK has ever seen, and that's me being kind. So we do not know. Anything is possible, and Dublin could be caught very short by London, who are trying to shore up the union in what is a really politically fraught time for them.
Thanks very much, Aoife, for finishing on such an idealistic and practical note. It's interesting, actually, in terms of the debate about the future of the Union, that the Welsh First Minister has also said that he thinks that the Union is going to break up. So obviously there is an urgency to this conversation in that wider context. So thank you very much to the panel. You've been listening to Patricia Mcbride, Colin Harvey, Colm Eastwood, Ifa Grace Moore and Declan Kearney, and I think they've all given us a magnificent contribution today. Thanks to all of you at home for tuning into this conversation, and I hope that you've learned a lot from it and that you'll join in future conversations about some of these issues. And many thanks to Ireland's Future for hosting this event today. And as I say, there are going to be further debates in this series, and you can find out about those on the website of Ireland's Future. So just to finish up, thank you so much, everybody, for your participation, and we look forward to having many, many more conversations. Thank you very much.